Hi, I'm Christopher Blakesley, and thank you for joining me for my first video health update. I've suffered from health problems for most of my life. I developed interstitial cystitis, irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia, and so much more at an early age. It went on for 30 years and disabled me for 15 years, and I developed nerve pain in over 80% of my body. But the good news is that I've been getting better for almost 6 years now. If you're curious about what I've gone through, see one of my other YouTube videos that I've made on that subject. I've been making written health updates for almost the last 2 years that are on my website if you'd like to go see those over at recoveryhealthcoaching.com. But I thought I'd move these over to a video format so I can release more of them and you can see the daily challenges that I deal with and how I get through them. It's been about a month since the last one, so let's go ahead and dive in. I had been doing my best that I'd done, period, in my recovery. I'd had a 155-day pain-free time streak. I had been setting lifting records every single time that I went to work out for 2 straight months. But then the day before Thanksgiving, I got COVID, and that set me back in ways that are a little unexpected at first, because the infection itself was actually pretty mild. I only had a sore throat and just felt down and out for a little bit, really low-grade fever. But the main problem was that I just developed a lot of inflammation that went along with it, and I had to become more idle. My energy level was down. I needed to get away from weight training, so my pain came back in a big way. I lost the pain-free time streak, and as I mentioned, a lot of things came back. Things like a lot of extra nerve pain, and I was even having some facial swelling if I was talking very much. I found myself sweating if I talked for very long. I was pretty tired anytime after I would eat. I would feel like I just had no energy to do anything else. And that pretty much lasted the first half of every day. And also my temperature sensitivity had come back. I noticed that suddenly clothing was a little bit more irritating to my nerves, and I was noticing the ambient temperature in the rooms. I also got some more irritable bowel syndrome back for the first time in a very long time, and one of the other things I hadn't felt in quite a while was a heaviness in my nerves again, where it just felt like my limbs were too heavy, that if I were to work out, felt like I would be weak whenever I actually wasn't. I also had a touch of histamine intolerance come back too. I assume because of the general amount of inflammation in my system and just getting me a little bit more borderline for those things to come back. I also had some muscle quivering once I started bringing back some of the exercise, just random twitches in my system, and generally just too much inflammation for the nervous system to handle. But thankfully, some things didn't. My interstitial cystitis didn't come back, but I'm really good at managing that and know what my triggers are to such a degree. But I didn't have any bladder pain come back. I didn't have urgency or frequency come back. I kept moving and standing as much as I could, even whenever I was down and out, because temperature in my low back and around my waist is one of the top things for bringing those things back. And if I stand up, I don't trap as much heat. It stays away quite a bit more. So the good news is I've been coming back up too. It's only been 16 days pain-free since the original COVID infection, and it usually comes on with a little bit of exercise, and unfortunately the time is more brief than what I was getting before around the pain-free stuff. But my heart rate came back down. If you check my website, it was crazy. It was over 100 whenever I was just sitting around whenever I had the fever. But it's back down to the low 60s, and it's still been dropping. And beyond that, I haven't lost much strength either. That was one of the other things that really pleased me. Despite having 3 to almost 4 weeks off, depending on the exercises, from all exercises, I thought, oh no, I'm going to have fallen back a long way with the weight training side of things, but thankfully not. And I've only had 7 workouts since, but I'm back to almost matching some of my personal records on a lot of things. But around the exercise side of things, I definitely became detrained and had powerful delayed onset muscle soreness and inflammation. The post-workout days were not the best, sometimes 2-3 days, and I was having to take as much as a week in between workouts to try and be easy and gentle on my system so it could handle it again. Now I want to talk about what I did to get back to progress and to pain-free time, because I've had quite a few days with it again now. But it took longer to bounce back than I first expected. Even in the realm of work, I needed to scale down things, and instead of having heavy blocks of Zoom on 3 days a week, which I typically do, I needed to spread them out across the entire week because I was noticing that I would just get overexerted and it'd show up at the end of the night whenever my cortisol levels would drop, and suddenly I'd have this big inflammation surge, and on top of that, I would just have a sore throat and generally not feel too well. And then on exercise, it was a tactical retreat, is the way I like to think of it. Instead of just fleeing like crazy from the symptoms, I had a plan about how I would scale back to years past what had worked for me, and knowing those sorts of things allowed me to formulate a plan. So I had to limit my abdominal workouts because that can be a trigger for me sometimes, and it certainly was. Once I got back to weighted chin-ups and pull-ups, I was having a lot of gastric inflammation, and it was carrying over to my diet, and that's what really brought on the irritable bowel syndrome. So to cope with that, I reduced the number of sets I was doing on all my lifts at the beginning whenever I was coming back, and I added rest time between the sets. Sometimes I would take over 5 minutes to make sure I had plenty of time to calm back down, and I actually dropped the chin-ups from my workouts. It was kind of redundant with the pull-ups anyway, and that's such a trigger for nerve pain for me in my shoulders anyway that it doesn't make a lot of sense anymore for me to keep going. I originally started doing chin-ups because I couldn't do pull-ups. I didn't have the strength and they just hurt too much. But now that I've progressed to where pull-ups work for me, thought, okay, let's do these now. And so dropping the chin-ups reduced the load overall and just a lot less inflammation from the exercise. And because of the gastric inflammation, I also had to change up my diet some. I've been doing keto, but pretty heavy on the veggie side, the non-starchy ones, things like cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and red cabbage. But I was just having such a problem with irritable bowel syndrome that I switched over to a really easy diet with starchy carbs, a whole lot of white rice, and applesauce for the pectin to help calm down my gut lining. And I even needed to reduce my calories because for the last few months I've been trying to bulk up, and eating, it takes almost 20% over maintenance for me to really gain weight and put on muscle. So that was just too much food going through me. And like in the early part of my recovery, I needed a lot of extended water fasting to give my gut a break. It came back in this regard, so just reducing calories down to maintenance was key as well. And I dropped all other vegetables from my diet and coffee, so there wasn't anything else to irritate the nervous system or the gastric area. And that really calmed things down pretty quickly. And after about 10 days, I was back on keto, and I've been on that ever since then. And one of the other changes that I made was I was sleeping as much as possible, but that became a problem for me after about a week. At first, I needed the sleep just to try and recover, but due to the nerve damage that I have in my head, neck, and shoulders, staying down too long can cause a lot more pain. So I had to, after that first week, suck it up and start just getting up regardless of how I felt, and that had given me enough of a boost to get over the infection, and I was back on the road to good health from there. And one of the last things I did was I skipped my monthly business trip because I woke up feeling not so hot, and I thought, do I really need to go get on a plane and get exposed again and just not be at my home and have my normal routines going? So I took a break from travel as well, and that really helped me get back on track. So the big takeaway for you viewers is, regardless of what your health was previously, the key to managing chronic health problems is recognizing where you're at in the moment and seeing everything that's contributing to your health and making the adjustments you need to recover. I love the idea of tactical retreats instead of just running away, dropping your gun and fleeing and get shot in the back by dropping everything that works for you. Instead, doing a tactical retreat whenever something bad happens, because it's almost never a linear flow whenever you're trying to improve in your health whenever you've got something chronic going on. So you need to step back carefully, and that way you'll be able to surge ahead whenever you've got things back under control again. This will shorten your downtime because whenever you scale back, you deal with all the physical causes of inflammation, and you also cut down on the psychological side of things by not making yourself quite so miserable. You won't despair as much whenever you know that you have a plan in place that'll work, and then you're avoiding all the inflammation from simply feeling bad emotionally. So whenever you have clear options for scaling up or down across the entirety of your health, you can find a way forward. And I've been at this for so many years that I can quickly figure out and think, all right, maybe I should do year 4 lifting guidelines and year 2 diet and so on. So I always have lots of options to get me back on track as fast as possible. I've had 16 days of pain-free time since I lost my streak, and 7 of the last 8 days I've had pain-free time, and the time seems to be extending again, so I'm sure I'm on the right track again, and then I'm going to set another streak before too long that hopefully will exceed the last one, and the times will just keep getting longer that I'm not feeling pain. And for the next focus, I'm going to be scaling up my exercise, and I'm planning on getting off of a sleep medication, so I'll be talking a bit more about that pretty soon. And to start the year, I'll do a big goal review to see where I'm at and to plan my next year, because I always find whenever I do that exercise of going over everything I accomplished that it gets me so excited to remind myself of all that I accomplished that I set even more daring goals for the next year. And of course, I'm looking forward to January 16th, because that's the 6th anniversary of me starting to turn my health around, so I'll be putting out a video on that too. I'll see you soon with briefer but more frequent updates going forward. I can't wait to get this series rolling regularly.